Today, we dive into the chaotic and often hilarious world of roommate dynamics. From late-night mishaps to passive-aggressive dish wars, join us as we explore true tales of shared living spaces that turn into battlegrounds of the bizarre. Buckle up for an audio journey through the good, the bad, and the downright absurd in Roommate Chronicles, the Unspoken Rules of Coexistence. Don't forget to hit like, share, and subscribe for more stories that'll have you saying, "Thank goodness that's not me." Story 1. I had a few roommates when I was living in the dorms my freshman year in college. They were good people all in all, and we had some good times, but as with just about every college experience for most of us, there was one guy who liked to drink a lot. One night, I came home at like 3 a.m. to find our drunk roommate just standing over one of our other roommates' beds, staring at him awkwardly in this odd Walking Dead-looking stupor. I could tell he was plastered because he was kinda rocking around in silence in the dark. Honestly, it was a bit creepy, so I called out to him in a whisper. He turned his head towards me relatively quickly, head bobbing all around, and slowly raised his finger in front of his mouth and quietly shook me like fucking Elmer Fudd hunting rabbits. He held his finger there for another few seconds and, nearly incoherently, muttered, "Fuck this guy." If you could permit me to quickly paint a picture of what Mike looked like, and what Rob looked like, you'll understand why this was a really huge problem. They were as polar opposite as you could imagine, in just about every capacity. Mike was a sufferer from Los Angeles, shorter, skinnier kid, with long hair and a stoner attitude. Rob, on the other hand, grew up on a farm and was substantially larger and substantially more fit than Mike, and he never fucked around. Dude was serious, always. Now, Mike must have already had it out without me noticing because he was primed and ready to fire without me even realizing what was going on. All I heard was the sound of water hitting cloth, and that's when I saw it. He had started to pee on Rob, who up until that moment was fast asleep. Rob, waking up to what he thought was just warm water, quickly realized what was happening and proceeded to jump out of bed and grabbed Mike, who was still peeing on him up until this point, and threw him across the room, off the far wall. He looked like a fucking rag doll bouncing off the wall, hitting the desk below, and then onto the ground. Mike didn't say a word. He stood up, quietly tucked himself in, and proceeded to walk right past Rob and climb back into his bed. Rob looked at me, looked at our other roommate who was now awake behind me, and looked back at Mike. All of us had this dumbfounded look on our face except Mike, who was of course within seconds, already starting to quietly snore. I honestly will never forget the sight of Rob standing there in the middle of the room with urine dripping down his face, off his shoulders and down his arms, with this absolute befuddled look on his face as he tried to process what the fuck just happened. I think it angered him more to hear Mike snoring because he angrily turned to his bed and tried to wake him up by shaking him violently at first and then hitting him in his back, arms, and head. Nothing. Mike was out cold. The rest of the year went as you could imagine. It was an experience. Story 2. Not me, but my cousin had a roommate her freshman year of college that had to listen to Harry Potter Book 1 on tape every single night to fall asleep. My cousin bought her headphones, but she refused to wear them because they hurt her ears. She would play it on a portable speaker loud enough to keep my cousin awake all night. The worst part, she wouldn't even start the tape, where she left off the previous night. She would play the beginning every night over and over again. Mr. and Mrs. Dudley of number 4 Privet Drive. Edit. It gets worse. Turns out the roommate wasn't even a fan of the series, had never watched any of the movies or read the other books. didn't know any characters, and as far as my cousin knows, she never even finished the first book because she'd fall asleep every time she started it. Story 3. When I was in 7th grade, my mom would drive us to school sometimes in our F-150. She would drop off my brother at the high school, then my sister and I at the middle school. She always had Matchbox 20's Mad Season CD in the player, but we hadn't figured out how to skip tracks yet. So, we heard the first 3 or 4 songs of that album 2 to 4 times per week, every week, for a whole school year. Also, when I was growing up, my brother was learning the viola. My mom had him listen to viola instruction tapes while he slept, basically just simple songs, like Mary Had a Little Lamb, but they got more complicated as he advanced. The problem was that I shared a room with him. So even now, I still have the connection that if I'm listening to classical music, I should be sleeping. Story 4. A very sheltered young woman who lived downstairs was remarkably open about her singing. She possessed no shame and, unfortunately, no talent to match. Belting out shares, believe, was a Saturday morning ritual for her. Hey, it could be worse, right? Well, maybe 5 a.m. was simply too early for Cher. But what truly disturbed me was her Backstreet Boys rendition of I Want It That Way. This is where things got strange. Perhaps she was just playfully tormenting me, but she'd belt out this tune every night when she got ready for bed after her evening shift. The oddest part was the sheer duration. There were nights I'd wake up at 4 a.m., and she'd still be singing, just as off-key and just as passionate. I finally reached my limit. I stomped downstairs to politely request she wait until morning. But the apartment was pitch black. No lights on anywhere, not even in her room. It was 4 a.m., and she was singing her heart out in the darkness of her bed. So I knocked, and the singing abruptly stopped. She answered the door, utterly bewildered, her voice barely a whisper. The next morning, I apologized for startling her, explaining I couldn't sleep with all the Backstreet Boys serenades. To my surprise, she claimed to have no idea what I was talking about. Then, it dawned on me, she was singing in her sleep, every night. How could I expect her to simply stop singing in her sleep? Perhaps she was subconsciously trolling me. But for 8 months, this little woman with no close friends or family nearby serenaded the night with Backstreet Boys. Story 5. I used to live with 3 other girls. I got along with one of them really well, but the other 2 were casual friends at best. I know most people like to say that they're the one who does the dishes the most, but generally it was me who took care of it. I did them about twice a week, because they just piled up every couple of days and nobody would touch them. No big deal. I figured that everybody has different rates for when they want to do dishes, and if my roommates only wanted them washed once a week or so, then I was the odd man out for wanting them cleaned twice a week. So I usually just ended up doing it myself. I didn't mind. We had a lot of other little conflicts over the semester, but I always kind of prided ourselves on the fact that we never had a quarrel about dishes. Fast forward a year, I'm living with some new roommates who are friends with the old ones. I'm telling them about the dishes, and how I felt that if somebody in the apartment wants a certain chore to be done a certain way, they should do it themselves and not expect everyone else to cater to their needs if nobody else cares about it. One of them gets a weird look on their face, and I ask what's up. She says those girls said you never did the dishes. They said you let them sit in the sink for 3 days without cleaning them. Turns out that the girls in the apartment really wanted the dishes done every day, but they were too passive-aggressive to actually talk to each other about it, so they just let them sit in the sink for 3 days until somebody cracked and did them as punishment. It was absurd. You're a 20-year-old woman, and you can't talk to your roommates about some dishes? Story 6. Let me start by saying I am handicapped, and when I am not in my wheelchair, I get myself around by scooting or crawling. I should also mention the roommates were my best friend for 10 plus years and her boyfriend. Before we moved in together, my roommates were talking about wanting to get a dog. No problem. I love animals. I did, however, request that they not get a large dog because I feared it knocking me down or over while I am out of my wheelchair. I also lived in the basement of the house and worried that the dog may knock me down the steps when I would scoot up to the kitchen. They ended up getting a pit bull. I have nothing but good things to say about the breed. However, it was a young dog that had not been spayed. She was hyper constantly, and they had to keep her from jumping on me all the time. They would barely take the dog out for walks because they're terrible, lazy pet owners. We had a deck that I kept my wheelchair under because I was unable to store it in my home. They would let the dog out on the deck, where she would use the bathroom. One day I was heading off to class and my chair was saturated in dog piss. After I explained what happened, they still continued to let the dog do her business on the deck because they're the most ignorant people I know. Another time I came home late and there was trash juice all over the steps and down the hallway that I had to scoot through to get to my room. That night my boyfriend at the time left a note in big bold letters on the fridge that read, "Clean up the trash juice in the hall." They started an argument saying, "You didn't have to put it that way," and write in all caps. That's literally what they wanted to argue about. My ex-best friend had super long hair, and it was everywhere in the bathroom. I asked her repeatedly to clean the hair out of the tub every time she showered. I had to explain to her that I do not have a shower chair, and I do not stand in the shower. So, if you don't clean it, your hair sticks to me. Halfway through the year, one of them lost their job and would not pay for their share of gas and electric and internet. When we would pay the rent, they would throw away the receipts, even though I managed all of the finances. At some point, my ex-best friend's mother was staying with us completely free for the last 4 months. I lived there, and she slept in the guest bedroom, where I had a spare single bed. The day I packed up to move her and her mother argued. I was a shitty person because I was taking a place to sleep right out from underneath of the mom. Like, I wasn't going to take all of my things when I moved. When I tried to discuss it reasonably like an adult, they would childishly ignore me or walk away. So, I packed everything and got the hell out. They never paid their share of the security deposit, and I never got it back because they fucked up the house by being general slobs and the dog ruined the deck. Story 7. I spent a summer living at a friend's house, and it almost had me in tears. I go to school far away from my home and decided to stay the summer in my school area. The dorms kick you out from May to August, so I had to find a summer home for a few months. My friend offered to let me stay at her house. Very cheap rent and cool. I moved in. Now I had already known she was a messy person and had accepted that fact, and I'd do my best to keep my space and the common space clean. Well, it was just a disaster from start to finish. She has 3 dogs, great animals, but the amount of hair and dirt they produce, you have to sweep and vacuum once a week, aka I swept and vacuumed. She didn't work, I did, full-time server. She never cleaned once. I did the dishes, I mopped the floors, and I took care of the dogs. She kept the dogs crated all the time for no reason. She was always home, yet I'd get home and have to let them out. They weren't even my dogs. I just felt so bad for them. I would come home at 10 p.m. from working all day, make dinner, clean the kitchen, and go to bed. Wake up to her having had people over that night, probably getting high drunk, whatever, and the kitchen is now trashed with fast food and dishes. So I'd get to clean again just so I could make breakfast. Oh yeah, her friends. Really nice people all around, but they would come over all the time. They would come over unannounced and walk right in. No knocking, nothing. I once was doing laundry and had bras and underwear all over the living room. They just showed up with no warning and sat on my clean laundry. I was in the shower. Eventually, I just gave up, other than taking care of the dogs. I kept my room and bathroom clean and just stayed out of the house as much as possible. Fucking horrible. Story 8. Not so much a nightmare roommate, but I had a ridiculously sheltered and possibly obsessive, compulsive disorder, OCD, freshman year roommate. In our dorm, the most popular layout of furniture to maximize the space in the room without bunking the beds was putting them in an L shape so that one was against the wall with the window, leaving a nice area of open space to hang out in the center of the room. Her mother decided we were not allowed to do this because one of us might roll over in our sleep and fall out the window to our demise 10 floors below. Mind you, the window was 2 feet above the level of the bed and bolted shut. Every night before we went to sleep, Roomie would lock the door, turn the handle to the right, pull on the door 3 times, turn left, pull 3 times, turn right again, and pull 3 times. Every single night. One day I had just taken out the trash and shortly after thrown out some scrap paper in the bin next to our sink. Roomie went to brush her teeth and accidentally knocked her toothbrush into said bin. Roomie proceeds to call her mother to ask whether she should wash off her toothbrush and use it or throw it away and buy a new one. She and her mother discussed the topic for about 10 minutes, with Roomie describing the contents of the bin and exactly how long the toothbrush spent in there. Mom apparently then transfers the call to Roomie's dad and the conversation repeats. After discussing the matter at length, it was decided that Roomie should buy a new toothbrush. Nice girl felt bad for her. Hope she was able to branch out a bit. Story 9. Currently dealing with the aftermath of a roommate from hell. Roommate L landed a job out of town for the summer and found Jay to take over her lease for 3 months. Jay had 2 jobs, seemed responsible, and for the first month or so we all liked her. She was nice, social, did weird things like use toilet paper bizarrely quickly, but otherwise she seemed fine. Roommate R shares the basement with Jay and R threw a small birthday party for a friend one night. Jay proceeded to invite the entire college basketball and football teams to our small house. Approximately 50 strangers showed up inebriated and screaming all over the neighborhood. The rental manager was called, and the uninvited football giants were kicked out. Jay never apologized, and after that, we avoided her as much as possible, just waiting for her to move out. About 2 weeks ago, rent was due and Jay didn't pay. Rent is 10% of her monthly income. After rent was a few days, she offered the excuse that someone had stolen her debit card and cleared out her account, and that she was working with the police and her bank for a refund. Around the same time, I received a Snapchat of Jay wearing one of R's shirts. She had taken it out of R's room. I advised R to check her room for more missing things. She quickly realized that $200 was missing from the opaque black jar she kept tips in. It was hidden in an inconspicuous place. Someone would have had to really search for it. We immediately suspected Jay and set up R's camera to record video while R was at work. I work from home and was there when Jay came home and stole $20 from a jar R had set up in the room. Unfortunately, the camera overheated and didn't catch Jay in the act. Jay was again confronted about her late rent and missed repeated scheduled meetings with rental managers because her mother was in the hospital. Jay told me her mom had tried to kill herself. She told rental managers she had breast cancer. She told a friend her mother wasn't in the hospital at all. She also told friends that money had been stolen from her room and that she had set up a camera to catch the thief in the act. R hid the tip jar in a dirty laundry basket in her closet until she could get to the bank. When she took it out, $300 more dollars were missing. We called the police, and while they couldn't do much, they advised us to confront Jay and get her to confess. Jay was evicted for late rent and given a 3-day notice to exit the premises. She agreed to meet with R and me to discuss the stolen money, but didn't arrive when she'd said she would, as we expected. She snuck into the house later that day. I happened to hear her and cornered her, calling the rental managers and R. We confronted Jay, and she confessed to stealing over $650 from Lar and agreed to pay the amount back the next day. Next day, she texts R and says she can only pay her $100. R is pressing charges, and Jay has been trespassed from our property. It's been a wild few weeks. The worst part of the whole ordeal was how Jay acted. Lie after lie after lie, more unbelievable than the next. She showed absolutely no remorse and kept talking about the situation as if it had been caused by someone else. I'm sorry this happened to you. Talking to her, I got the sinking feeling that she didn't have a conscience and that she felt she had a right to the money. It didn't feel like I was talking to an actual person. I honestly feel bad for the girl. She has effectively ruined her life and needs serious help. TLDR, my compulsive liar roommate stole hundreds of dollars from my other roommate and made our lives a living hell. Edit. At a party this weekend, Jay bragged to several people about stealing the money. Previous roommates have come forward saying Jay stole from them and used the same excuses of her debit card being stolen and her mom being in the hospital. Jay told some of her friends that one of her roommates had stolen $400 from her room and that she had set up a camera to catch them, and her former coworker at a car dealership says she stole a car. Story 10. I have many stories of my college roommates, but the one that stands out the most was the shower incident. My girlfriend and I were renting a house with a female friend who liked to play fast and loose with the term hygiene. From this point on, she'll be known as the barista. We were fairly accustomed to the less than ideal odors that would waft gently around the barista, such as when she adopted a diet consisting entirely of hard-boiled eggs, or the nutmeg incident. The house we were sharing was built in the 1960s, and we had separate bathrooms. The barista's bathroom was generally heinous in both smell and appearance, with used tampons and other feminine detritus scattered around. As a result, it took us a while to realize that the smell of raw sewage belching forth from her side of the house was not, in fact, her fault. One day, my girlfriend and I were watching TV while the barista was at work, and we heard an ominous gurgling noise from her bathroom. Shortly thereafter, we were assaulted by the smell of raw sewage that was so strong it caused my girlfriend, at the time an autopsy technician, to literally dry heave. Clearly, an investigation had to be mounted, so we made the perilous journey into the barista's bathroom, stepping cautiously to avoid the used condoms and other keepsakes in her biohazard collection. When we arrived, we discovered that raw, chunky sewage was liberally bubbling up from the drain in the barista's shower, which was so coated in pubic hair, mold, and stains it looked like a modern art masterpiece. The smell was horrific, and we immediately called the landlady. When the barista returned home from her shift, she was horrified that the lawn had been torn up to expose the shitty Orangeburg sewer pipes that had been nearly entirely blocked by tree roots. Since the barista's bathroom was the closest to the sewer main, the backups had been bubbling up in her bathroom for months, without the rest of the house being aware. We asked her if she had noticed the issue, and she mentioned that sewage regularly bubbled up from the drain while she was showering bi-weekly. Her response? I just squish it back down with my feet. That was when she got a new nickname, Waffle Stomp. Waffle Stomp and her moronic family gave us many stories in the year and a half we lived together, and she also introduced us to our second shitty roommate, statutory rape neo-Nazi. I can share more if people are interested. Story 11. This happened last week, so it's fresh in my mind. I have a housemate that has lived in the house I am sharing for a good 7 years or something, edit. This is the length of time that she has lived in the house. I have only moved in recently. She's outlasted countless other housemates during this time. When I agreed to rent the room, I got a super weird vibe from her, but decided to rent it anyway as college started the following week and I was desperate to find a place. Anyway, to quickly set the scene, she has always acted incredibly entitled throughout the time I've lived here, and she acts like she owns the place. She doesn't, and neither does her family. Her stuff is everywhere throughout the place. Her parents and grandparents regularly come over without warning, and she sits out watching TV every evening, denying me and my other housemate the opportunity to use it, to name only a few of her antics. Last week I had been working on an assignment and went to cook later than I usually would at about 8/8:30 p.m. She usually cooks for hours most nights from this point onwards to meal prep. She eats a lot of food, although we have no verbal agreement that she has exclusive rights to the kitchen from this point onwards. Knowing this, I knew that I had to start cooking ASAP before she took over the kitchen and I wouldn't be able to eat. I got out my frying pan and placed it on one of 4 stovetops. As I did so, she looked at me and booms, "Excuse me, but I'm about to start cooking now." I'm pretty sick of her antics, so I look her dead in the eye and say, "Are you seriously suggesting that I can't use one of 4 stovetops to cook dinner in our shared home?" After a long pause and some huffing and puffing, she says, "Well, I'm using the big burner, as I'm cooking pasta." So was I, but beyond being amusing, this didn't bother me as there is an identically sized burner on the other side. She just wanted to claim ownership of the spot I had put my pan on. So I proceeded to cook my dinner. The whole time she acted like it was the rudest thing in the world for me to expect to be able to cook dinner that night. Throughout the 25 minutes it took me to cook my meal, she continued to verbally sigh and tap away at her phone while glaring at me, undoubtedly complaining about me to her parents or something. To make the situation even more ridiculous, she didn't talk to me the next day / ignored me. Such a weirdo. The end of this semester can't come quickly enough, as I plan to move out ASAP. Story 12. Kind of had a similar situation in my second year of university in a house of 4 guys, including myself. There was one guy who was a dweeby, passive-aggressive control freak who was a big hypocrite. He would do stuff like moan at me for leaving a plate in the sink, so I'd politely point out that the whole side space was filled with his dirty pans and dishes. There were other things, but to give you an idea, he was a short, only child who had control issues. The problem for him being that he was really short and scrawny, and I'm twice his size, but still a skinny guy. I grew up with a younger brother, so I had an idea how to handle this. So I got my duvet from the bedroom, wrestled him to the ground, wrapped him up, and made him apologize. Being a big-time control freak, he hated that. The other housemates thanked me for it, and he was a little more wary of bothering me after, which was nice. TLDR, housemate was a passive-aggressive control freak. Didn't realize that I'm a bigger cant than he is. Story 13. One of my former roommates in college bought a $700 TV, a $200 Blu-ray player, $120 speakers, and a metric fuck ton of snacks for his side of the dorm. He bought all of this with the inheritance money he received from his grandfather's passing. Now, you're probably thinking that that's a bit excessive to buy all that, but it's his money and he can do what he wants with it. Okay, but he bought all this within the first 2 weeks of living there. Long story short, he had to sell/return the TV, speakers, Blu-ray player, and most of his belongings to support his tuition, and so that he wouldn't starve once his endless food supply ran out. Overall, he wasn't the worst roommate ever. I've had plenty worse. But what really rubbed me the wrong way was when I was alone one night there was a blackout in our dorm. I was hanging out in the hall talking to the freshmen. I was a junior at the time, and we were all shooting the shit. One guy pipes up and says, "You're blank's roommate, right? Do you like Final Fantasy VII? I love it." That comment seemed odd, so I asked him how he knew I loved Final Fantasy VII. "Oh, your roommate almost sold me your copy you had on your shelf for $10. This was a mint condition black label copy of the game, which I thankfully still have. It's a rare edition, and I spent good money on it. The dude was really cool about it though, figured out that my roommate hadn't cleared it with me to sell the game and declined. The guy knew this inherently too, because my roommate had built up a less than charming reputation with the girls on campus, and he was known as a sneaky fuck to the guys. TLDR, had a roommate who used his dead grandfather's money to buy excessive stuff for our dorm room. Ended up selling most of his belongings and almost sold my mint copy of Final Fantasy VII that I had on display. Story 14. The barista learned that she had to mix gas and oil in the weed whacker and assumed the same principle applied to her $10,000 scooter. That poor vehicle smoked and wheezed all over town the entire time she owned it and spent a substantial portion of its life in the shop. She lost no fewer than 4 iPhones and 2 purses by leaving them on the seat of her scooter and going into her classroom. She struggled with her weight, and rather than use the free gym provided on campus, decided that a 3-week-long, hard-boiled egg cleanse was the way to shrink her ass. She ate nothing but hard-boiled eggs for breakfast, lunch, and dinner until my girlfriend and I removed all eggs from the fridge due to the sulfurous smell that followed the barista everywhere she went. The barista ate several tablespoons of nutmeg. She wasn't paid or dared to do it. One of her coworkers suggested she try it, and down the hatch it went without question. Nutmeg, if you're unaware, is a gnarly hallucinogen. She spent the entire next day tripping balls, screaming about the snakes in the walls stealing her feet, pouring glasses of water only to dump them on the floor, and generally being a pain in the ass. The video I took during that time is a constant reminder to never have roommates again. The barista discovered the wonders of using a slow cooker and would regularly make her favorite meal, unseasoned ground beef, chopped raw potatoes, and water. She dubbed this stew, though I preferred beef potato soup. It would usually sit in the fridge until it was sentient enough to vote, at which point my girlfriend would throw it out. Dipwit earns his wings. Dipwit wanted to learn how to fly. He wanted to join the Air Force, but they wouldn't take him, so he joined the Civil Air Patrol instead. For those not in the know, the Civil Air Patrol, CAP, is an auxiliary to the USAF, largely doing things like search and rescue and giving high school students an opportunity to fly. Dipwit was never, as far as I know, permitted to touch the controls of an aircraft, for which we should all be thankful. I came home one day to find that Dipwit, in his eminent wisdom, had built himself a hang glider. This consisted of a triangular frame made of PVC pipe, not glued together, layers and layers of duct tape, and a bedsheet stretched over the whole thing. He was extremely excited about his invention and invited me down to the local park to watch him test it. Note that Dipwit was a legal adult with no mental illness or handicap. He was just an idiot. After about 45 minutes of watching Dipwit spring back and forth, dragging his unwieldy hang glider behind him in a vain attempt to somehow lift off from the ground, I suggested that he should try to gain a little elevation and jump off, because I was then, and am now, a terrible person. I intended for him to jump off the wall around our home, which was roughly 6 feet. He took this to mean jump off the curb and into the moderately trafficked street, causing cars to slam on their brakes to avoid hitting you. After several close encounters with moving vehicles and their irate drivers, he had the idea to move somewhere safer for his flight tests. This was, of course, the roof of his home. I wish this tale ended with Dipwit soaring triumphantly into the sunset, but instead it ends with him sobbing like a small child in an emergency room with a broken arm. Dipwit tries to burn the house down our rental house came with a shitty propane grill in the backyard. I had fixed it up, and cookouts became a regular event at our place, with me serving as grill master and Dipwit trying to stick his finger in the burner to see how hot it was. Hot enough to cook a burger apparently wasn't enough information. He had always been enthralled by fire, so it wasn't a surprise when I came home and discovered him using the grill to cook some hot dogs. The problem was, Dipwit didn't understand the difference between propane and charcoal grills. Even though he had seen me fire the grill dozens of times, he never made the connection between the propane cylinder and the total lack of charcoal in our house. When faced with what was, to him, an inoperable grill, he went into full problem-solving mode. One trip to Walmart later, and he had a bag of instant light charcoal, a box of matches, and a soon-to-be empty bottle of lighter fluid. I came home from class to the overpowering stench of lighter fluid and bratwurst. When I went into the backyard, I found Dipwit and his sister the barista gleefully scorching the hell out of a helpless pack of bratwurst. Dipwit had filled the flimsy, sheet metal grill with most of a bag of charcoal, dumped an entire bottle of lighter fluid on it, and threw a match into it. The bottom of the grill was visibly glowing red, and the propane hose had begun to melt because Dipwit didn't even try to remove the mostly full tank from the grill. He had also neglected to move the grill away from the house, which resulted in an interesting pattern of scorching to the stucco where the metal had contacted it. Luckily, he didn't burn down the rental, but from then on he was not allowed near anything heat-producing in our home, including the toaster. A sordid Dipwit tried to make his own fireworks in our kitchen by dumping out the contents of a bunch of little paper poppers into a pile. The pile self-detonated, leaving him temporarily deaf, me terrified in another room, and a burn on said countertop. We did not get our security deposit back. Dipwit once broke into our home at 3 a.m. to surprise his sister, who was on vacation in another state at the time. I greeted him in the dark with a shotgun and nearly shot him on principle alone. Dipwit threw a full can of Raid into a bonfire because he didn't understand the difference between insect repellent, insect killer, and fragmentation grenade. Story 15. The Barista Strikes Back. My girlfriend and I once made the mistake of going camping with the barista and Dipwit. In our defense, this was before we truly understood the depths of their idiotic depravity. The trip itself was a total failure, as the desert we were camping in was struck by a 100-year record snowfall the night before we left. This started a lengthy series of camping failures for my girlfriend and I, but that's another story. We eventually gave up on the trail and left for home, but in doing so we made a nearly fatal error. We let the barista drive. One of our vehicles was a crappy 1990s-era Saturn with a manual transmission. The barista swore up and down that she could drive a stick, so we gave her the keys. She managed to get the vehicle rolling without stalling it, due to the large mountain we were driving down, and away we went. Everything went smoothly until we hit the bottom of the mountain, and the barista screamed, "We have no brakes." She panicked and, rather than simply slowly coast to a stop on the perfectly level, straight highway, jerked the wheel onto the shoulder, and aimed the nose of the car at a 40-foot cliff. My girlfriend had the presence of mind to yank the parking brake, and the Saturn grumbled its way to a halt. Apparently, when the barista told us she could drive a stick, she meant I can put it in neutral, roll 15 miles down the mountain, and use only my brakes to control my speed. She had literally cooked the brakes to the point that they were completely non-functional and managed to strand one of our vehicles and half of our gear on a sketchy stretch of highway for 8 hours. This was the most egregious, but definitely not the last problem she caused in that car. Story 16. Let me tell you about Julie. It started with small things, making me pay for pizza she ordered and then not letting me eat any, stealing my stuff and giving it to her friends as presents, eating all my food when she broke up with her boyfriend and crying about how sad she was because he had a giant penis, stealing my cell phone and racking up a $200 long-distance bill, attempting to kill my betta fish, and trying to break my computer. Then shit got weird. We'll start with the crack whore incident. One afternoon, she brought some girl into our room that can only be described as a crack whore. She told me they were going out and she'd be back late. Whatever. I do my work and I go to bed. I wake up the next morning and crack whore is asleep on the floor in my clothes with my blankets from my bed that I had been using. Dumbfounded, I look at Julie and say, "What the fuck is going on?" She tells me to be quiet or I'll wake crack whore. I start to get pissed off and tell her I don't give a shit and that's my stuff that I was using and she has no right to just take it off of me and give it to some stranger. Not to mention we're not allowed to have overnight guests in our rooms, and she bursts into tears. Crack whore wakes up and starts yelling at me in some scary, spastic, slurred speech. They leave and I'm left with blankets that smell like alcohol and shit and one less outfit. But that was all nothing compared to what finally freed me of her. It's midterms and I have a huge project due in the morning. It's about 1 a.m. and I'm up finishing it off, feeling pretty proud of myself. I get my stuff ready to take a quick shower before going to bed and put everything in the bathroom before going back to my laptop to check render progress. That's when Julie stumbles in, completely shit-faced. She climbs into her bed and exclaims she's drunk and doesn't feel well. I knew she was 2 minutes from throwing up, so I decided to wait in my shower. Lo and behold, she stumbles out of bed, runs to the bathroom, and slams the door. I hear her heaving away, followed by the flush of the toilet. Then I hear slurred cursing and screaming. I look over to the bathroom and notice there is water coming out from under the door. Before I even connect the dots, the door opens and a tidal wave of toilet water and vomit comes flooding out of the bathroom into our room. Julie storms out, screaming at me, and kicks the fucking vomit water at me, getting it everywhere. She then screams, "This is all your fault and you'd better fix it," before storming out of the room and slamming the door. I sat there for a moment, as one does when they're in complete shock, staring at the floor as water and vomit continue to pour out of the bathroom. Then I got up, walked over to her dresser, and pulled out all of her clothes and threw them to the floor to sop up the mess she made. These were not cheap clothes either. We're talking Gucci, Vince, D, and C. I took the rest and built a little barrier wall between her side of the room and mine to keep her nastiness from spilling over into my area. Then I went to deal with the bullshit and get my resident advisor. That's when I remembered that my ID was in the bathroom. I went to retrieve it to find that she had thrown up all over my clothes, ID included. I fished it out, washed it off, and went to file a report. My resident advisor was out for the weekend, so I got a hold of the road instead. She put me up in a new room for the night while they brought out a cleaning crew. The room reeked of alcohol, so when they arrived, I made sure they knew it was her and not me, and that she had a history of drunken outbursts. I had reported her shit a number of times before, but this time they saw it was serious. Julie came back the next morning and screamed at me about how she now had to attend associate in arts meetings because I reported her. She was only 18, and it was a dry campus. They had sort of a twisted sense of humor about the whole thing, and I love it. This all happened in a span of 35 days. Julie ended up getting kicked out a few months later. I saw her ex-boyfriend, the one with the giant penis, and he told me he was sorry for what a bitch she was. Told me some crazy shit she did while they dated, and told me how she had been thrown out. The college let me interview roommates and move anywhere I wanted after that whole thing. My second roommate was awesome. Story 17. At university, one of my housemates had his girlfriend around in the winter and decided to get out his reusable hand warmer, and all you need to do is to immerse it in boiling water until the stuff inside it melts. He, however, decides to put it in a saucepan on the hob, then go out for hours. With my room being the closest to the kitchen, I start to smell burning first, but not until the entire living room and kitchen had filled with a bluish smoke with no windows or doors open. So I had to be the one to hold my breath, run in, open all the windows and doors to the outside, and make sure nothing was on fire. Thankfully, there was so much smoke the fire on the hob had been put out. I should also point out I am asthmatic and had to go for a checkup and chest x-ray following this, as whatever was in the hand warmer had aggravated my lungs. This same person left the front door unlocked when no one was inside several times in an area with a large amount of crime, and took personal offense when we asked him to not leave food uncovered on the side or asked him to stop leaving all of his washing up in the sink, so we had to either wash it all up or pick his stuff out. Edit. I realized that I put in that his girlfriend was over at the start of the story, then never mentioned the relevance. She started smoking pot in our house whilst she was there, even though we told her and him that we can't have people smoking in the house. We almost got us evicted by the landlord because of it. Story 18. I'm actually the horrible/horrifying roommate. I didn't do any of this shit on purpose, but you can't actually help what you do when you're asleep, can you? First, I snore. My roommate and I shared the same room, and she eventually got used to it. It wasn't bad, but going from sleeping alone to sharing a room with someone who snores sucks. Second, I talk in my sleep. Not full sentences or anything, but enough for my roommate to hear a word or two every hour or so that she was still awake in our room. Third, I move around a lot. A lot of the time in the beginning of us sharing a room, she thought I was waking up when really I was still dead asleep. This brings us to the actual horror part though. How many times this happened, but it was often enough to freak my roommate out, but I would sit up in bed. But how is this horrifying, you ask? I would sit up in bed, turn my head, stare at her with my eyes so dilated that they looked black, and growl/make scary noises/sleep talk/was most likely snoring along with muttering the occasional word. That's how I was the horrifying roommate. Story 19. My roommate for the summer of my freshman year of college was a randomly matched one. He moved in and was kind of nice, but also not very smart and very open about his life. At one point of the semester, he was messing with the girl who lived next door by using the app YKYak to pretend to be her and getting random other guys on campus to come to her room saying they had been offered sexual acts by her. He got 3 guys to do it before he finally stopped. After the rest of the floor found out how messed up this was, everyone ostracized him and made fun of him. He quickly grew tired of this, and one day there was a party in that same girl's room that he was not invited to. I wasn't either, but because I didn't really care to hang out with the rest of the floor since I was focused on the Calc 2 class I was taking. Those in the party were sending him pictures and videos of them having fun, which irritated him more, up to the point where he left our room and started banging on their door to confront the people teasing him. One of the girls at the party opened the door, but wouldn't let him in to fight the other kids. He proceeded to punch her in the face and yell at the others, then came back to the room and went to bed. About 10 minutes later, there was a knock at the door and I answered it. It was one of the campus police officers, so I immediately woke him up and said, "It's for you," and went back to bed. The next morning, he was moving his stuff out and I never saw him again. On the bright side, since he left so early in the semester, I had a room to myself for most of the semester. Pushed the beds together to make myself one huge one and had a king-style suite. Story 20. My first semester in college, I had a roommate who was a spoiled brat. She didn't know how to use a washing machine. She had so much shit that my stuff was just this little blob of blue in a sea of pink. She was always cold, so kept the temperature up really high. She would always bring guys back to the dorm room, and I'd have to hang out in the common room. I finally got fed up with that. She brought a guy back and tried getting up to something. She kept giving me looks, and I just ignored her. He finally left, and she was like, "Why didn't you leave?" I told her to fuck off because it was my room too. Though, she once left a guy in our dorm to go run off and do something. He was pretty cool, and we watched a football game together. Story 21. I have a new roommate moving in. I've not met her yet. I know she's moved because her suitcase is in the room, but she must be out. I go to sleep as I have work in the morning. I woke up to her coming home at about 3 a.m. Sounds like someone's with her. She comes in, grabs her laptop, then goes into the living room. I start smelling weed, not bothered. I hear them drinking, then I start hearing her and her man singing The Circle of Life quite loudly in the living room. I hear them then begin having sex on the sofa. I put in my earplugs and try ignore it as I don't feel I can say anything as I've not met her yet. When I wake up, I don't know how much time has passed. There is light shining in my eyes and I hear latex. I open my eyes. My roommate is spread-eagled in my room. Light on, door open, being pounded. I can't see her face, but I can see her tits. Mortified, I start making noises and moving as though I'm waking up. They don't stop. I turn back around and try to ignore it. Sounds stop. I think it's over. Turn around. He's eating her out quite publicly. I notice the worst part. She's taken my fucking blanket off the floor. This goes on till about 6:30 a.m. Guy eventually has his fill and leaves. She falls asleep, snoring stupid loud. I get the fuck out of the room. See my guy housemate's beer all over the place that she's stolen, and see she's taken his weed. There's used condoms all over the floor. The guy has used my housemate's toothbrush. Later that day, I get a text. She has asked my housemate for my number, apologizing, saying she doesn't usually do that because she just met someone on her walk home. Her walk home. I discovered she has a boyfriend back home. I've still not seen her face. After some arguments between the house, she moved out 3 days later. I found out from friends that she's well known in the ski resort and brings home a new guy every couple of days. 2 weeks after she moves out, my housemate finds another used condom hidden in the kitchen. Story 22. There's a very good chance that my roommate will see this, but to be honest, I don't care. First, I'll admit that he's a very quiet fellow, which I appreciate. I've never known him to throw raucous parties or make much noise, and there's never been a time when I've had to ask him about turning down his music or whatever else. He mainly keeps to himself, too, which means that I don't have to spend much time talking to him. It's when I do talk to him, though, that all of his problems start to become evident. For one thing, the guy is completely lacking in any sort of social skills. There have been times, on more occasions than I care to count, that I've voiced some complaint or another, and he has just stared back at me with a blank expression. It's gotten to the point where I don't even bother asking him for help with anything, because chances are that he'll wander off in the middle of my request. He never makes any effort to help with cooking or cleaning. He leaves his belongings in random places throughout our apartment, and the times that I've come home to find him hanging around naked number in the hundreds. That last point is made so much worse by the fact that he's incredibly hairy. I have quite honestly found his hair in my food before, and I don't even want to think about which area of his body it came from, particularly because his hygiene habits are so subpar. I once caught him licking his hands and dragging them over his face in order to clean bits of food from his beard, and I know for a fact that he didn't shower that night. All of this pales in comparison to the worst thing about him, though. Not only does my roommate keep a thoroughly bizarre sleep schedule, staying awake in the middle of the night, sleeping during the day, and then unexpectedly switching that routine, but he has also started inviting himself into my room and onto my bed whenever he feels like it. Just the other night, I was jarred awake by a sudden jostling, and I saw the guy sitting only a few inches away from my face. I thought about kicking him out, but he's just too damned cute. Story 23. My roommate in college, and a couple of years afterward, was named Victor. He was a phenomenally nice guy, and I really couldn't have asked for a better person with whom to share space. He was prompt with his rent, clean, polite, and only too willing to help when bizarre situations cropped up, but every so often, a peculiar habit of his would manifest. The first time that I fell victim to this oddity was on a Wednesday night. I had just returned from a club that I occasionally frequented, and I was feeling rather more exhausted than I had anticipated. After trudging into my room and clumsily turning off the light, I flopped myself down on my bed, not even bothering to disrobe, and immediately fell asleep. Mere moments later, I was jarred awake by the sound of a terrifying scream. Came Victor's voice, only barely muffled by the wall. It had been high, loud, and seemingly desperate, prompting my sleep-addled mind to race into overdrive. Should I rush over and see if he needed help? Should I just ignore the shriek and go back to sleep? I was halfway out of bed before I heard more noise coming from the other room, and as near as I could tell, the hollering included lyrics. Victor would belt out one line, then repeat it in a higher note as though imitating a shouting crowd. Like New Orleans, Detroit City, Dallas, Pittsburgh, New York City, Kansas City, Atlanta, Chicago, and LA. Immediately following that recital, which was an excerpt from James Brown's Living in America, I heard Victor's voice sing along to the horn section, which included an explosive high note. Over the next hour or so, I learned firsthand that Victor occasionally liked to play the same 15 seconds of a song over and over and over and over again. He was kind enough to do this while wearing headphones, but he was apparently so passionate about the music that he felt compelled to sing along. As such, I was treated to the breakdown for Living in America something like 200 times that evening before I finally managed to get back to sleep. A couple of weeks later, Victor became obsessed with the main run from The Final Countdown. I'm a tolerant guy, and I'm pretty easygoing. Still, I had to be up at 4 a.m. the following morning, and that just wasn't going to happen with my roommate screaming doodle-doo-doo. Doodle-doot-doot-doo. Over and over. I went over, knocked on his door, and politely asked him to keep things down for the night. The poor fellow looked so embarrassed that I felt mortified on his behalf. TLDR, my otherwise perfect roommate developed an obsession with screaming. Story 24. Not my story, but my neighbor had a roommate freshman year who was a total stoner. So much so that he rarely left his room. 1 or 2 of the school year through, he got pretty sick, smoked more weed, and left his room even less. Never went to the doctor because he was always stoned and didn't want to get caught. He was sick for the entire 3rd and 4th quarter. Mid-4th quarter, he busts out of his room and yells, "I just shit blood. Take me to the hospital." He went and found out his appendix burst a month ago, and he could have easily died at any second. He also had some other kind of server virus that I can't quite remember what it was called, but also would have easily killed him had he gone any longer without a doctor. Scary to think how easy somebody can fall into something like that. Story 25. My roommate is very nice. She'd be a good friend, but I'd hate to live with her. She's also a massive princess. She wants everyone to do shit for her, but the opposite is like pulling teeth. She also never helps clean and eats in her room and leaves plates in there for weeks at a time. But this was the last straw. This happened last week. So the week prior, I made my roommate some steak because I had done well in my exam and I was feeling good. Fast forward a week and she goes food shopping. My face is buried in my books because I have a huge neuro exam the next day. She buys some steak, comes over and asks me if I could make her some steak. I told her I couldn't because I needed to study and I was kind of busy. She looks at me and keeps pushing. She says she specifically bought the steak so I could make it for her. I still said no. She gets mad at me, calls me stubborn, and says fine, I'll make it myself. My eyes opened wide. See, my roommate is an idiot in the kitchen. We have the fire alarm in my apartment go off numerous times a week because she'll turn up the stove super high, start cooking shit, and forget about it. Next thing I know, the house is covered with smoke. Literally last week, she ruined my microwave by somehow burning bread in it. So I swear, it wasn't even 5 minutes after the exchange and the house was covered with smoke again. I sprinted to the kitchen and it's like a little child who did something wrong and got caught. I went to the stove, got rid of the smoke, and made her damn steak. She puts the steak on her plate, takes a Snapchat of it and runs to her room, leaving pots, pans, bloody knives, utensils, seasoning, cutting boards, etc. all over. I was like, what the fuck? Are you not gonna clean up? And she's like, you made the mess, not me. I clean the whole entire kitchen and she comes out and says, do you need help? Kitchen is pristine. I told her straight up, I can't wait for the next 3 months. Our lease is almost over and I can't wait to not live with you. She got pissed and hasn't talked to me since. I'm glad. Her voice is the worst. TLDR, my roommate is a fuck and burns my kitchen down every time she cooks. I'm sick of it. Story 26. A few years ago, I moved into a house with 2 strangers when I was having financial problems and couldn't afford my own place. One was nice, the other was mental. He had a shaggy rug in his bedroom. He never vacuumed it and would walk the hair from it all over the house. It was everywhere, all over the house. In the bath, I'd find bits of it in my food, in my bed. It was gross. The other housemate asked him if he could just vacuum it to get the loose hair off, and he went crazy at him, screaming and swearing. My room was next to his, and I'd often hear him talking to himself and also slapping himself, which he did often. Once after he'd had an argument with the other guy, I heard him singing a song he'd made up while slapping himself to the beat. It was something like, Roger is a fucking dick, and one day he can suck my dick, with a slap on every other syllable. He kept singing it for ages and making weird monkey noises in between. I actually recorded it on my phone in case I needed evidence of how crazy he was. They had another argument over the trash or something a few weeks later. He threatened to slit the other guy's throat, and that guy moved out. He would take random things out of my kitchen cupboard and hide them and then put them back a few days later, or I'd just find them in weird places around the house. Or he would just rearrange the stuff in my cupboard or knock it all over. I got pretty annoyed about it, but didn't dare confront him, so I just put a sign on the cupboard with my name on it and, "Please don't touch." Next day he ripped it off and put it in the bin. It got to the point I was pretty scared of him and would just stay in my room with the door locked. Oh, also he had pinstripe vintage-style pajamas that he ironed daily. Can't remember more stories about him now, but I was very glad when I sorted out my finances and could get out of there a few months later. Story 27. I lived in a suite with 5 other guys, so essentially 3 doubles. Our roommate who lived in the third one, who we are all boys with, was the one with the hygiene problem. He showered no more than once a month and wore the same clothes without washing for a very long time. Also, there were other things such as leaving unfinished food around the suite. The horror story was when one time his room smelled so bad, I mean like a dead pig covered in its own feces that was dropped in a sewer full of dead babies. Our drunk roommate went into our smelly roommate's stank chamber to see where he was, but he didn't find anything except for a big wave of stench that essentially nuked his nostrils. He had this disgusted face, and I asked him what was wrong, and he said, "I'll be back." He went into our suite bathroom and closed the door. That moment was where I heard the most horrific-sounding vomiting no mortal man should ever hear. It sounded like a volcano had sex with Niagara Falls and proceeded to explode with 1,000 bottles of whiskey. Everyone in our suite was filled with extreme disgust and laughter after those events had transpired. TLDR, roommate's room smelled so bad that it made our drunk roommate puke like Krakatoa. Story 28. Well, this is one of many roommate stories I've gathered throughout my teenage years in boarding school and college years in shared homes. Let's just call her V. She was one of the most beautiful girls I had ever seen and the kind of person who would walk into a room and would have everyone's attention. We had known each other for a few months before it was time for me to move out of the dorms, and she conveniently had a room open in her house very close to campus. The house was lovely and everything was perfect. It all started once my friends started commenting on her behavior. I hadn't really noticed how drunk she was or how much she talked about herself, probably because I enjoy listening to her crazy stories and smoked a lot of weed at the time. She also had a habit of leaving burners and her space heater on, which was not only dangerous, but also expensive. She also had prescriptions for uppers and downers and would always share too. At the time, she was the friend I needed. She dropped out of our school to continue a good job in her field. Then she quit her job. Soon enough, she was abusing her medications and rarely coming out of her room. Once a girl came into our house and started looking through our bathrooms. I had met her before, so I asked what she was doing, and she said that V had cut her leg really badly and needed medical supplies or an ambulance. The roommates and I had not seen her all day and rushed up to find her blacked out with a gash on her thigh. She said she had gotten it falling on glass in her closet, but we checked, and there was no glass to clean up. Then there was the time I had people over, and when they left, they found V in the driveway sobbing and talking to herself. The roommates and I went outside to talk to her, but she was literally making no sense. She said she had taken 2 high mg Klonopin, and we found an almost empty bottle of gin with her. Mind you, this girl didn't weigh over 100 pounds. We tried to get her up to her room, but she broke down and told us that her cousin had just committed suicide. At the time, I had just lost my uncle to an overdose and could relate, so I sat and talked with her about it. Then she said that her aunt committed suicide and died. I had remembered her aunt attempting suicide 2 years prior, but she survived. She started crying even harder and hitting her head on the stairwell where we were sitting when she could tell we were all realizing that none of this was true. We decided we needed to call an ambulance or something because we couldn't control her. When the fire truck and ambulance arrived, she immediately changed her entire personality. It was chilling. She went from sobbing to stone cold and defensive. She ended up getting in an officer's face and tried to punch him after saying, I don't care, you're not a real cop. Please believe he picked her little butt up and said she ought to learn respect since the cops and firefighters in our town are interchangeable. They begged us to kick her out of the house so they could arrest her, but that was my friend and I didn't want her to be in trouble, just wanted her to snap back to reality. All the roommates and I were pretty unnerved, but one of us left to stay somewhere else that night. I eventually came back home to sleep at around 2 a.m. to a quiet home. I remember looking at my door as I fell asleep and thinking, I really should close my door, but it's just a crack. I woke up sometime later to a figure standing over me and leaning on my bedside table. I stared long enough for the light to show me that it was V, drunk as all hell, standing over me while I was sleeping. I sat up, which startled her, and she fell backwards onto herself. I told her to get the fuck out of my room. She told me to get the fuck out of her room. She was out of her mind, and we continued to argue nonsensically about why she was in my room. Eventually, she crawled out of my room, and I closed my door. She started banging on our roommate's door, the door in between ours, saying, I know you're in there, over and over again in the raspiest, deepest voice I had ever heard come out of her. The knocks were in a certain pattern, too, I had recall even now. But that roommate wasn't even home. So I grabbed my phone and started filming. I walked out and told her to stop because there was no one in there. She kept going. I opened the door and turned on the lights to show her no one was there. She started hitting the wall, instead repeating the same chant. I turned off my recording and went back into my room. What the fuck else was I supposed to do? The other girl lived downstairs and claimed she heard thudding but went back to bed. And she wouldn't stop, so I began recording and went to demand that she stop and return to her room. Weirdly enough, she listened and stumbled into her room. I kept recording. She eventually fell to the floor and closed the door with her foot, ending the video with bangs. We ended up contacting her family and assisted them with moving her back home. She probably hates me for telling her parents the truth, but she really needed the help. She'll probably hate me if she reads this. Sorry if so, but it was definitely a horror story for me. TLDR, my roommate was a hot mess. Edit. You can't help someone who doesn't want to help themselves. She is alive, okay, and is in AA. She was not mentally ill, just mentally unstable and needed the firm guidance of rehab or her family, not a college house. Story 29. I made the mistake of moving into an apartment with a colleague turned friend. Turns out she was immature, naive, and had the worst judgment. Some gems of stories from my time living with her. Announced she wanted to adopt a dog a week after we moved in together. I have a cat. I'd had cat food for 2 years at this point. She knew I had a cat. Adopted said dog anyway, then proceeded to only partake in the fun stuff associated with owning a pet, i.e. pets, naps, and cute photographs on Facebook. I worked from home at the time, so it fell to me to feed, entertain, and walk the dog. Yippee. Also, must mention here that the dog was adorable, but there was definitely something wrong with her mentally. She was extremely hyperactive, more so than any puppy should be, and didn't learn much from training or was very slow too. But adorable nonetheless. She became quite a favorite of mine, much to the chagrin of my disapproving cat. She designated the bathroom off the living room as the dog's bathroom. Why I allowed this, I have no idea. It was also the bathroom into which the water from the washing machine would empty. Don't ask, shitty apartment. If the output pipe wasn't placed properly, which it often wasn't, and the dog's daadas hadn't been cleaned up immediately, which they often weren't, I'd be treated to the sight of a shit nuggets happily bobbing about in a flooded bathroom. Once was enough for me. After that, I forbade the use of the bathroom as a doggy outhouse. During the time that the second bathroom was busy being the site of flooded shits, we shared my bathroom. She'd use it earlier in the morning before she went to work, and I'd use it later, like the lazy freelancer I was. Walked into the loo once to find underwear, with EHRM, used period paraphernalia still attached to it, in the wash basin. Shudder. And that wasn't the last time it happened either. This one has made me innately wary of all unfamiliar wash basins to this day. She once also took a bet off of some Facebook stranger. That's right, took. He was giving it away for free. After finding a familiar insect on the furniture in the living room a couple of weeks later, with her permission, I went into her room and lifted the baseboard of the bed to confirm my suspicion. It was teeming with bed bugs. Teeming. Cue panic attack. Bonus dog story. Went out to dinner with the roommate. Came back to a house smelling to high heavens of a mixture of eucalyptus and vomit. Turns out the dog had chewed off the cap of a bottle of eucalyptus balm, eaten half its contents, and then proceeded to poop and vomit in 30 different places in the living room. We spent half the night at the vet's and the other half cleaning up the mess. While she was a nightmare roommate, she was a kind person. Not malicious at all. Thank goodness for small mercies. Story 30. Depending on your POV, I may be the one from hell in this situation, but having been there, I feel like my actions were justified. In college, all 3 of my roommates' junior year either graduated or moved out, so I had 3 new random ones for my senior year. They all had problems. The one next door to my room would constantly sing Alicia Keys' No One, over and over at the top of his lungs along with other songs too high for his voice. The walls were paper thin, so I was constantly asking him to shut the hell up. One was a large dude, 6'3" or 4, and not in any type of good shape. He would walk around in the same clothes he slept in all day, stinking up the common room. One time, he knocked on my door frantically yelling that he was going blind. He claimed that he had woken up just now, about 2 in the afternoon, and couldn't see. I asked if he had been drinking the night before, and he claimed he hadn't. He was basically acting like a 5-year-old and wanted me to call 911, so I did for the very first time ever. I was shaking from stress when I did, because this was such a ridiculous situation. The ambulance came to our dorm and wanted to take him to the hospital, but as soon as they came into our room, he claimed he was fine. The EMTs were like, "Are you sure you don't want us to drive you to the hospital?" And he was just like, "No, I feel a little better." There was literally a moment of me looking at the EMTs and me looking at each other like Oliver Hardy or Jim from The Office. As soon as they left, my roommate wanted me to take him to the hospital. It was right down the street, but I was just like, what the hell is going on, man? I had an important rehearsal to get to, so I refused to wait with him there, but I did follow him in my car as he drove himself the half-mile, just in case he went blind. When I got home about 6 hours later, he was sitting in our common room eating a pint of Ben and Jerry's. Didn't even bring up what had happened to me. I asked, and he said the doctor had said he had a hangover. I brought up that he claimed to have not been drinking. He shrugged his shoulders. He also stayed over winter break while everyone else went home. When I came back, the toilet was drenched in piss. I asked him about it, and he claimed it had been like that the entire week and that he had just used the toilet in the hall. The final dude was an acquaintance of mine, although we didn't talk much. I had shared cable with my prior roommates, so I offered to get it installed again for the new ones. I handled the bill, and they were supposed to pay me every month. At the beginning, it was okay. Then they all started to fall behind, but I kept track of all they owed. I guess by the end of the year, they all owed me about 2 to 3 months worth, so $30 to $60 each. When I finally got annoyed about it, this acquaintance said he had decided not to pay me because I had more channels than they did, and that wasn't fair. The truth was, I did have the main box in my room, but everyone had access to everything. The only thing I had extra was On Demand, and specifically WWE On Demand, which I paid for myself and didn't add to their charges. Despite trying to explain this, he refused to pay me, and the other two jumped on the bandwagon. This all culminated in a situation where we had to clean the dorm in preparation for the end of the school year. It was filthy. I literally was only in my own room the entire time I was in the dorm, so the mess was all theirs. I wanted to make sure it got taken care of, so I offered to do the bathroom if they would do everything else. This was agreed upon, so I went to work. No one ever refilled paper towels or toilet paper, so I had stockpiled some in my room that I would use only for me. I used some of that to clean the bathroom, which was just filthy, but ran out. Rather than buy some cleaning products, I went looking for something to use and settled on a sponge in the kitchen. Looking back, obviously that was a dumb thing to do, but I just figured, oh, a sponge. That'll help scrub off some of this dried urine. When I had the floor and toilet looking pristine, I put the sponge back and forgot about it. Cut to 2 weeks later. I came back from a rehearsal to find all 3 roommates waiting for me in the common area. They were confronting me about me being a bad roommate. I was like, whoa, what the hell is going on here? I brought up the cable and they turned it around on me, saying I had been cheating them. When I started to get mad, my acquaintance started yelling and asked me how I had cleaned the bathroom. I told him the sponge and he freaked. Apparently, he had been using it for the past 2 weeks to clean his dishes and now had a sore throat, which he claimed was as a result. I literally hadn't even considered that when I used the sponge in the bathroom. Idiotic, I know, but I couldn't help but laugh when thinking of him washing his dishes with a soap stained with his own pee. I ended up moving out first because I was done with exams and it felt like the end of the movie. The birds as they stared at my friend and I carrying stuff to my car. TLDR, had 3 horrible roommates. One had me call 911 when he had a horrible hangover. One refused to pay for cable, so I accidentally washed the bathroom with his kitchen sponge, which he then used, and got a sore throat. When I moved to Chicago, I was moving from out of state, so I didn't get a chance to check out the place. But for the low price of $500 with everything included, in a nice neighborhood with a jacuzzi, how bad could it have been? I thought. I got there, and the place was very nice aesthetically, but whoever stayed in my room before me left behind a shit ton of gross. Dirty or sticky VHS porn tapes and a cooking spoon and a pipe for meth, heroin or crack, I guess. If that wasn't bad enough, the guy who owned the house and was my roommate stalked me on OkCupid the whole time I lived there. Would scold me every time I had a male friend come over as if he was my partner or something. And then one night, I woke up to find his clothes in my room. He apparently got drunk and was naked in my room while I was sleeping. Who the fuck knows what he did while I was asleep? And then the kicker, I was really naive due to being young and didn't know enough to rip up and use checks. He stole a check out of my trash and cashed it, $500 worth. I don't know what's worse, that dude or the psychotic cat lady who took me off the streets. You know, because she is a die-hard Christian lady, and that's what Jesus would do. But she would flip the fuck out over the smallest things, like her printer jammed one day. So what did she do? She took the printer and threw it across the room in a blind rage, almost hitting one of her cats with it too. She also had an issue with me having male friends over because she apparently wasn't, running a whorehouse. She also accused me of stealing her Coca-Cola. I fucking hate Coca-Cola. Also accused me of making her dishes smell like fish after I cooked fish, even though I scrubbed the fuck out of the pan multiple times and couldn't smell anything. She also regularly complained about the queers, Angelina Jolie, and how she's a massive slut, and how Obama was the Antichrist and secretly a Muslim. Also proceeded to tell me about her involvement in BDSM, which was completely out of the blue and unrelated to anything we had been talking about. Also gross to think about since I found her to be very unpleasing aesthetically. There was that one time I ended up living with a creepy registered sex offender. Dude fucked a 13-year-old boy. He treated his dog like shit, yanking him up by his neck roughly with a choke collar when the dog didn't even do anything wrong. He admitted it was to assert dominance over the dog, even though that dog was one of the most well-behaved dogs I had ever seen, even without training. Also, all of the dogs he ever had throughout his whole life were named Jesse, and were all chocolate labs. He was super anal about cleaning things. I am definitely not a neat freak. He seemed to lack any empathy, probably had severe Asperger's syndrome. He was only slightly better than the previous 2 roommates mentioned. Story 31. Not terrible, but definitely the weirdest. So, for some backstory, I lived in a house my dad owned in my rent. To him was getting good grades at college. So a friend of a former boyfriend at the time needed a room. Let's call him Horacio. Horacio moved into the basement area, and all is well, except lo and behold, I realize I'm going through groceries at an alarming rate. So, I stopped buying groceries and only ate at friends' houses or went to my folks for dinner. One day I came home from class and Horacio was drinking a bottle of ranch dressing. I asked him WEF, and he just said there was nothing else to eat. Another story from that time period, my then boyfriend, not Horacio's friend, worked at a liquor store. They had a bottle of clear liquor break at the store, and he rescued it and put it in a Sprite bottle, which he brought to my house and stuck in the freezer. A few days later, I logged into my LiveJournal account to read a passive-aggressive post about how you shouldn't put vodka in a Sprite bottle because someone might be sick and drink straight out of the Sprite bottle and then apparently vomit all over the kitchen. My thoughts were if something is in the freezer and not frozen, it should be relatively clear it's not Sprite. Also, who drinks straight out of a 2-liter container when it isn't yours? Story 32. I had 4 roommates in college, a different one every single semester. The first one killed a dude. He got high and ran over an old man. He went to jail for a while, came back to school like nothing happened. He told me while we were in the dorms just hanging out, I killed a guy. Eventually the police took him away. I had an empty room after that for 2 months. Second guy said he was majoring in yard work management, which I think he meant something like, I don't know, business or something. There's no such thing. I told him why would you go to college for yard work management, and he said, well, in today's economy you have to be competitive. He dropped out the next semester and started a yard work company. The third guy wholly SHIT. This was 2008, so WoW was still a huge deal. This is pre/ during Lich King, and this dude was balls out addicted to it. He did not even own a fucking toothbrush. He did not bathe. He would eat a whole entire pizza and a 2-liter of Mountain Dew. This is not an exaggeration. Every single day. He was also a heavy smoker. He stank so fucking bad by the middle of the semester you could smell my room from the lobby if you were near the elevator. We had like counselors come in, all these people to try and get him to at least take a fucking bath, which he finally would do after enough people complained. Since he never left the room and basically knew he was getting kicked out, he just double committed. While I was in the room, he started having a lot of phone sex jerking off into Mountain Dew bottles. Good Lord, it just goes on and on and on. Me and some of my floor mates tried a campaign to make him go crazy. I installed a ThinkGeek Otron under his bed, a tiny chipboard that makes a small beep randomly every 5 to 30 seconds. He broke his speakers apart looking for the sound while I was in class, but by the next day, he just got enormous headphones and stopped caring about it. At least he didn't play with the speakers on anymore. We demagnetized his school food card about 10 times. He just stole food. We did all sorts of shit, and all it did was nothing. He was into smearing shit on his body, which we knew because he would go to the bathroom occasionally while having phone sex and talk to the people on the phone about how he was smearing shit on his body while he smeared shit on his body. He would stay up playing WoW for 2 to 3 days, sleep for a whole one, then do it all over. He did, as predicted, drop out / get kicked out at the end of that semester. Now he's a police officer in my hometown. Also not a joke. My 4th roommate was dope as shit, and we're still super good friends. Later, when I had an apartment, I had this bulging fuck of a dude named Brett with 1T I lived with. He was on antipsychotics. He would frequently quit taking, and he would steal people's bicycles and take them apart in the house and just throw the pieces all over the place. He would invite strangers he met out in the Home Depot parking lot, his choice of place to loiter, over and give them his pills and whatever. I put a lock on my room, but they would steal his stuff over and over and over. He was a food hoarder and would hide fast food all over the place. Taco Bell from 8 months ago under the couch. Bet you can't guess what kind of smell that makes. Story 33. I sublet this room from the craziest woman on the planet. 1 week after moving in, she posted the room again on Craigslist, and I didn't find this out until I came home from work early one day to see her setting up a showing. I confronted her about it, and it turns out she wasn't kicking me out. She wanted me to move all of my stuff to her room for 1 month because she wants to go to Europe, and that I need to pay $200 more during that month. So basically, I couldn't keep my room. I would have to move all of my shit to her room while someone else occupies the room I'm renting and then move all my shit back to my room. It made no sense. She also constantly went into my room while I was working to go through my stuff. I set up cameras and got the whole thing on video. The funny part, though, was that she considered herself a good cook. Yet, she didn't know basic cooking skills. She would turn the oven on to the highest setting she could think of, put meat in, and leave it to cook for God knows how long. Or she would turn the stove on the highest setting, then put something on the pan, and then go back to her room to watch TV until the entire place started billowing smoke. It became a daily occurrence. Story 34. I've had horrible roommates in the past, but 3 really stand out. The first was a girl I worked with who was just totally chill. We were great friends, etc. She moved in, didn't want to pay rent or utilities, used all of my food, then left the dryer on high heat and left for the day. Our dryer was old and had no shut-off timer, so it would run until you turned it off. We were extremely lucky to not have a fire. The second was a friend of my ex's, who was a compulsive liar, ended up selling drugs out of my home without my knowledge, let his boa constrictor get loose for 2 days without telling me, while I have a small dog running around. He kicked my dog, and just acted like a jackass in general, then refused to pay. The third was a friend of the second. He was underage, but his parents couldn't control him, so they asked if he could stay with us. He refused to shower or wash his clothes, pissed on our futon and didn't clean it, and ran off after 2 weeks. His parents were upset they had to take him back and refused to pay us rent for him. He snuck back in a month later to see our other roommate and wouldn't leave, so I got to call the cops on the little bastard. The last I heard, he was arrested about 10 years ago for bringing weed into a courthouse. Dumbass. Story 35. I was 19 years old, on my own for the first time, and had to defuse a potential suicide thanks to my crazy ex-roommate. In college, I lived with a friend who I wasn't that close with, more of an occasional hangout than a close friend. I knew she was socially awkward, but who isn't sometimes? I liked her enough, and she seemed pretty normal. Man, was I wrong. She had this boyfriend. They had been dating since high school and were attached at the hip. This got annoying. He became like an extra roommate who didn't pay bills. If he wasn't in class, he was at our place. He would stay over even when she wasn't there. Whenever I brought over friends, the roomie/BF would both swarm them and beg for attention because they finally got to socialize with someone other than each other. I tried to do things to help the situation, asked if they could respect boundaries more, asked him to help with chores or buying toilet paper. They were just generally oblivious to the amount of space they took up, how loud they were, etc. Not to mention my roommate was extremely emotionally unstable, which I didn't know until we lived together. But that's not the story. I wake up at 3 a.m. to the sounds of screaming and hysterical crying. This was almost a weekly occurrence with my roommate, so I went back to bed. Her BF was there to help her. Then the pounding started, like a rhythmic banging on the wall. Should I do something? No. She has episodes like this. I used to try to help her, but I've figured out she just wants attention. Hours of it. Then she and the BF come out into the hall. She is screaming at the top of her lungs. I hear objects being thrown. I hear him yelling. I'm a 19-year-old kid who's never been in a domestic violence situation. Do I call the police? Then I hear him yell, "Put down the knife." At this point, I'm terrified. I lock the door and go call 911. Fuck, my phone's not on the charger. I look around, but I realize it's probably in my backpack in the living room. My laptop is in there too. I have nothing. I waited out in my room for a few minutes. The yelling and throwing stops. I'm listening to them talk. From the conversation, I figured out that she wasn't trying to stab him. She was trying to cut herself. There was lots of, "Why shouldn't I do it? You don't love me anyway." I open the door halfway. They are sitting on opposite couches sobbing. There are big kitchen knives on the coffee table between them. Stuff is strewn all over the floor. Her glasses, the trash can, an old pizza box. I can't get to my phone without walking through the middle of it. I ask what the hell is going on. He had been flirtatiously texting girls from his classes. Had she read the texts? Yes, all of them. Had he met up with any of them? No. Had he made plans to meet up with any of them? No. But the texts were flirtatious. So she read some of the texts to me. He definitely was being suggestive, and I understand getting emotional. But that's when you discuss breaking up. Throwing objects? Threatening to kill yourself because he doesn't love you? That is flat-out domestic violence. I am livid. I tell them that this is ridiculous and immature behavior, and clearly they shouldn't be in a relationship. I tell him that for his safety and his sanity, he needs to leave our apartment and spend one whole night on his own. I take all knives, razors, and medication and lock them in my room with me. I tell her that if I hear one more outburst, I am calling the police on her. In retrospect, I probably should have anyway, but the situation had calmed down, so I didn't think the police would do much. The kicker? He didn't even leave. He spent the rest of the night with her in her bed. I didn't renew the lease and moved out shortly after that. I haven't seen much of them since, but they are still together according to Facebook. I know they were planning on getting married back when we lived together. I hope that doesn't happen. He needs to get out of that relationship, and she needs mental help. Story 36. In university dorms, I lived in a townhouse-style unit with 3 other people for a single summer semester. One never cooked, dining hall, and was pretty cool. The other 2 would cook, but would leave food scraps out, wouldn't take out the garbage ever, and would only clean dishes when they wanted to use them again. I'm not a tidy person myself, but the kitchen became unbearably awful. We started getting fruit flies, and they multiplied into swarms. They would cluster together on walls in the hundreds. I put out trap selectivity so they didn't really make it into other parts of the dorm, and basically stopped using the kitchen. The thing about my school was that whoever left last was responsible for the damage deposit, stupid system. I cleaned my crap out of the kitchen, did a garbage run, cleaned my room and half my shared bathroom, and bailed, leaving the 2 messy ones to deal with whatever was left. Story 37. At first, he kept to himself. No matter, I can't complain about that. He'd try to set cleaning schedules where I cleaned the kitchen and living room, our other roommate cleaned the bathroom and foyer, and he cleaned the balcony. Whatever. He never came into the living room. For a month, not one time. Then, when my girlfriend visited for the weekend, there he was. My bedroom opened into the university. Then, don't see him in the living room for a month. Another roommate and I rearranged the furniture, and the next day there he was, in the living room, calling the landlord to complain we'd move the love seat. Another month, and I see a letter from my mother in the mailbox. He had the only key to the mailbox, would leave mail on the kitchen table. Letter disappeared from the letterbox, but didn't appear. I asked him about it. He says it never came. Ultimately, another roommate and I search his room, find a scholarship check of mine ripped up in his garbage, and bank statements from another roommate. Confront him, he denies it. Call the police. They eventually just warn him, but the landlord agrees to let him break the lease with no penalty. He leaves the next day. My cutlery and other roommates' frozen chicken fingers in the bushes below the balcony. Story 38. Lived with 8 girls in college, 3 to a room. One of my roommates, we'll call her Rochelle, was awful. Rochelle had a twin, and they both had separation issues, so they were always together. Her twin lived down the hall, mind you. So it was like we had a 4th freaking roommate. Rochelle was dirty as hell. I'm talking half-eaten Twinkies under her bed, refusing to help clean, loud as anything. Total drama. Rochelle would come home and have sex with her boyfriend or girlfriend, depending on who she was seeing, with the 2 of us in the room, like bare butts in the air. One time, Rochelle ended up having sex with her twin's girlfriend, and her twin came raging in. Jerry's Springer episode. They fist fought, and the girlfriend ran out of there butt-ass naked. Rochelle also kept saying we were using her stapler off her desk. Hint, we weren't. But replaced it with a prank stapler that vibrates and actually really hurts your arm. We knew this because one of my guy friends came in and asked why there was a weapon on the desk. He explained it actually hurts to use. So we hid it in her comforter, and when she flopped on the bed, per usual, she got zapped. Story 39. Not my roommate, but the landlord, but she lived in the house. So I suppose technically a roommate too. We were in a house share. She owned the house. There was me, her boyfriend, her son, same age as me, and 3 other tenants. She was alright to start with, friendly enough, had a laugh, could have a chat with. There was a Polish guy living with us who she gave a bit of a hard time to because, admittedly, he was a pain in the arse. Anyway, he moves out and the 2 other tenants begin giving problems, so she focuses her annoyance on them. I then suggest to someone at work that he should take the Polish guy's room, and this is where it goes downhill. Immediately, she had an issue with him. I don't know why, but for the month he was there, she just couldn't stop finding problems and grievances. He eventually got pissed off and moved out. Her attitude towards him was disgusting, and it was a sign of things to come. I've typed it too many times to change, but for the Americans, washing laundry. I'd left my washing out to dry for 2 days. A normal time to allow it to dry when it's in a cool room, and I came home from a night shift to find the rack right at the door. Instead of asking me, she just did this, multiple times too. Each time I never moved it until I had slept, because I wasn't letting her dictate passive-aggressively like that. She had a tongue. Use it. On multiple occasions, I opened my door to find the rack leaning against it. I threw away a metal lasagna tray because the lasagna was literally encrusted onto it. I came into the kitchen again after a night shift to find she had actually fished it out of the bin and left it for me to clean and recycle. She stopped me from using the fruit bowl because you leave the wrappers on and it looks untidy. She saw me use kitchen paper to wipe a spillage, so that was banned as it's a sanitary product for food only. The one time I confronted her on this nonsense was when I came home to find my clean washing literally dumped in a pile at the door to my room. I had words with her, and it turns out that her boyfriend did it, instead of using his voice to say, "Hey, it's been there a couple of days. Do you mind putting it away?" To which I would have done. However, she gave me hell for chastising her. I would also have to cook, clean then eat. Otherwise, she would get angry at me leaving the kitchen messy if I left them for the 15 to 20 minutes it would take to eat. So I regularly ate cold. However, she would regularly leave dirty dishes lying out all night. I once left a tiny amount of crumbs, and she called me back to make me clean them all. The final straw was again to do with washing. See a theme here? I had done it before leaving for a night shift, leaving it in the hall to dry as everyone did. I came in at 2:30 a.m. to find it had moved. I unlocked my room to find it standing right there in the middle of my room, less than 12 hours after putting it up. She had issues with it. It was still wet. She actually went to the effort of getting out the spare key, entering my room without permission, leaving it there and locking it again. When I saw her in the morning, she told me that everyone, aka her, disliked the smell of my clean, washing, and no matter where she moved it. It still stank the house out. What a load of utter bollocks. She just had an issue with me, full stop. Thankfully, I had the news that I was leaving that hellhole. She also replied, "You may not get your deposit back as you're a bit scruffy and I may need to deep clean your room." Considering I wash daily, wash my clothes regularly, and keep the room tidy enough, I was more than a bit disgusted and offended by her attitude. Proved her wrong when I handed her back a spotless room, grabbed the deposit, drove off down the drive and away to never see her again before she could change her mind. Not to mention she was a conspiracy nut, anti-vaxxer, anti-school, anti-government, anti-authority, gluten-free, drug user. Thank God I'm away from that freak, hopefully never to see her again. Story 40. First roommate. His mother would show up regularly to clean his room. He moaned horribly loud when he jacked off, and he stole a pair of my panties. When I went home for Christmas, he moved out and stole all my shit. Second roommate said he was being abused at home and asked to stay on my couch. This went on for months. He got loaded every day and then started talking about suicide. He admitted later that he wasn't being abused and just wanted to live at my place. He then lost his shit and was taken to a mental institution by the police because he had all the components for detergent suicide. It would have killed me too. Third roommate woke up with my roommate standing over my bed twice. First time I was groggy and thought I imagined it. Second time I flipped the fuck out. I got a boyfriend, and one night when we were kissing in my room, he kicked in the door and said I was just doing this to hurt him. Then we cried a lot while we both sat there awkwardly. Moved out on Monday. Fourth roommate, another panty thief. Didn't talk a lot but stole my panties and ketchup. Just those items. I didn't ask but moved out soon. Fifth, sixth, and seventh roommates. Then I rented a room off this couple and the woman cried a lot and beat up her boyfriend. After they split, they rented another room to a guy who frequently had orgies in my living room and left it smelling of urine. There were a few more, but that's probably enough to take in. After all this fun trying to afford a place, while I went to school, I decided to bite the bullet and just get another loan and rent my own apartment. Story 41. I found a roommate on Craigslist because I was desperate to get out of my former living situation and I had no one to stay with. I met this girl and we got along, so I moved in a couple weeks later. She asked me when we met if I wanted any pets because she was getting a puppy and thought it would be nice if it had a friend, and I said I was thinking about getting a puppy as well. Anyway, things were fine for the first 4 months, except I noticed that she was very unstable, had constant panic attacks over her job, and drank heavily almost every day. At one point, she was hospitalized with severe stomach pain, and they said she had colitis and sent her home the next day, where she continued to drink while she was sick and probably making it worse. Christmas Day, she was sick with the flu and got drunk then as well. She stayed in bed most of the day, and I spent the day with my boyfriend in my room. Anyway, we were laughing and giggling kinda loud because we were about to get frisky, and she knocked on the door and demanded that I tell her I'm okay because she thinks I'm being hurt or something. Then she barges in and decides to hang out with us. While my boyfriend and I were laying in bed, I was only wearing a tank top and underwear. It would have been obvious to anyone else what was going on. But she decides to intrude anyway and drinks a bunch of our alcohol until she passes out on my bed. So that was weird. But it gets better. The following February, I decided I wanted to get a kitten instead of a puppy. And she freaks the fuck out. She said cats are destructive and she didn't think it would get along with her puppy, and she had the final say because my name wasn't on the lease and that I would have to wait until she moved out, which could have been a year or more and wasn't a definite thing. I was only subletting. It was rich coming from her because her puppy had already chewed up the wall in the spare bedroom, pooped on my clothes, and chewed up both of our belongings, including a Christmas present I had given her. I was livid because she said I could have a pet when I moved it. Our landlord allowed pets. Had she said I couldn't have the pet of my choosing in the beginning, I wouldn't have moved in. So we started arguing via text over the next couple days, and she got more and more ridiculous and belligerent. She was treating me like a child. I even agreed not to get a cat. But by that point, I didn't consider her a friend anymore because I felt like she lied to me. Instead of letting it go, though, she kept trying to meet up to discuss it, and I said I'd rather discuss it over text so there would be a record of what was said. Then she threatened to kick me out because I wasn't replying quick enough, I guess. I was at work, and I refused to talk to her in person. Before I would even reply to that, she kicked me out for real and threatened to blackmail me by telling the landlord I smoked weed, which she was totally fine with, and I had text messages to prove it. She kept not giving me enough time to reply and just kept getting angrier and angrier because I wasn't doing what she told me to. All this happened while I was at work, and it was super busy because it was a Macy's and a week before Valentine's Day. Luckily, my boyfriend was a law student and told her she would have to refund my rent for the rest of the month if she wanted me to move out immediately. I stayed with him that night, and we went to go get my immediate necessities the next day. So, we get there and I go upstairs to start getting my stuff. I didn't speak to her. My boyfriend was standing in front of my door, so she couldn't get to me. She demands that he move or she'll call the police. He told her if she didn't call, he would. So, she calls and tells the operator there's a man in her house who wouldn't leave and was threatening her and he might have a weapon. Obviously, he was doing none of those things. I actually needed him to stay and help me because I have a physical disability and needed help carrying things down the stairs. But he goes and waits on the porch so the cops wouldn't be alarmed when they got there. So the cops come, and she comes running out and tells them he's a psychopath who attacked her. He never touched her, and she had no wounds. He explained the situation and told them he was only there to help me pack, and he had no idea what she was talking about. The cops were very reasonable and could tell she was bats hit, and they told my boyfriend he could help me pack. Then she starts telling them I have weed. I hadn't had any weed for a month by this point and had gotten rid of my pipe. They didn't care and didn't even bother searching my stuff because it was so obvious we were being civil and she was the crazy one. So we left and I moved in with my boyfriend, who's now a lawyer. I started college. We moved to Vegas with our 2 cats, and I volunteer at a cat shelter. So suck it, Ashley, you massive crazy bitch cunt. No one likes you. Story 42. Had a roommate my freshman year of college that was a really smart guy and loved history. Pretty nice guy for the most part, but he had 2 terrible qualities that made him awful. He was super obsessed with the Confederacy and the Ku Klux. He has Confederate flags covering the room. He also had a masturbation problem. He lifted his bed, put his desk underneath it, and made a curtain of Confederate flags to hide himself so he could beat off whenever. Didn't matter who was in the room, if the door was open, or if we were having a conversation. After a while, I got used to it, which is pretty fucked if you ask me. Him beating off was just a part of life. I'd fall asleep every night hearing him fap away without a care in the world. One night, I fell asleep with my headphones on and woke up a few hours later. I took them off and was just about to fall asleep. I guess he thought I was totally asleep because I heard him vigorously fapping and he was louder than normal. As he climaxes, I hear him say my name over and over again. I never once stayed in the room again after that. Then there was the schizo guy we shared a bathroom with who tried to kill me with a hammer one night. Good times. Story 43. I lived in a house my parents owned with my best friend. We rented the 3rd room out to a random person we found on Craigslist or Facebook. Either way, the roomie moves in and seems nice enough. She has nice parents, seems friendly. We really have no reason to complain. One night we're watching TV and she brings home a guy. Okay, cool. 15 minutes later, they're doing the dirty in the upstairs hallway bathroom. We can hear feet squeaking on the tub and everything. After that, she never comes out of her room. For a whole year. During the course of the year, we got curious and peeked in her door while she was gone. The entire floor was covered. There was no carpet visible. Boxes of bagel bites, cheap cheesy puffs, pastaroni, and plates were everywhere. The bed sheets had a literal body outline from her caked-on makeup and not bathing regularly. One time, she tried to give herself a neti pot treatment in the bathroom with regular salt and destroyed her nasal lining. The icing on the cake, though, was when she texted me from work saying she clogged the toilet. She'd taken a dump, and the toilet was overflowing. It was running through the vents and into the kitchen downstairs, but she had to go to work. So I was going to need to come home from work and take care of it. Called my dad to come as well, and we cleaned it all up. Then he opened her door due to the smell. Gave her no lease renewal option. It was nuts. Story 44. Last year I got super sick. I had lived in the same shared house for 8 years and had thought my roommates were also my friends. Big fucking mistake. I got very sick and had a health crisis which left me literally screaming and begging for help on the bathroom floor. They ignored me for a full hour, then finally I heard one come to the door. Oh, thank God, I think. Finally, someone will call 911 or my friend who was on call to help and knew I was really sick. Nope. Roommates stood outside the door and told me point blank they refused to call 911 or my emergency buddy because they didn't approve of me screaming and didn't want to encourage my mental illness by helping me. I still remember the sinking feeling of realizing I was going to die while my roommates stood outside the door and did nothing but accuse me of being crazy. I remember blacking in and out of consciousness and desperately trying to keep screaming, so maybe someone would at least investigate what was happening. Eventually, the one roommate who was my friend before moving in realized something was really bad, and this was not a mental health issue. She ended up calling my emergency contact, who showed up and got me to the hospital. At the hospital, I was informed my organs were failing, and if I had been even 15 minutes later, I would be extremely dead. When I got out of the hospital, the roommates kicked me out for being too dramatic and screaming too much and abusing people by forcing them to deal with my problems. Despite the fact that I had been in and out of the ER for 3 days and nearly died, and was on terrifying and invasive medical treatment, they still kept framing the issue as if it was some sort of mental breakdown and telling people I went crazy. I was prescribed opiate painkillers, which I took according to schedule and stopped when the prescription ended. Someone called my mom and told her I was lying about health issues, and the real problem was that I was addicted to painkillers. I desperately needed my parents' support to access health care and had to spend 3 bedridden days convincing my mother that I did in fact have serious medical problems and was not in fact an opium addict. So then I was super sick and couch homeless for 3 months, while also having to prove I wasn't crazy and dangerous. TLDR, my roommates almost killed me, then blamed me for it, and booted me onto the street when I was very, very sick. Story 45. I lived with 3 girls in off-campus housing in college, against my better judgment. None of them cleaned, and they were incredibly rude. Girl 1 survived solely off of microwave pizzas, which exploded everywhere, regularly left dishes out to mold, puked in the sink at least once a week, and never flushed the toilet. When asked to clean, she said I should have to do it since she was in hard classes. She watched Netflix at least 10 hours a day and barely passed said classes. Girl 2 was a violent drunk. She would also yell at my guests while sober and constantly try to get up in people's faces. She threatened me multiple times, to the point where I was able to use her texts to break lease and could have pressed charges. Girl 3 was petty, stupid, and just blindly followed what the other 2 said and did. She kept stalking her friends with benefits and always expected me to listen to her problems. None of them are successful now, unsurprisingly. Story 46. Lived in a place that rented out a couple rooms in a basement. The place had issues. My roommate and I got along, mainly because I didn't confront him about his filthy habits. We've all been there when something sticky dries on the counter and it has granules on it. But the consistent feel of sticky sandpaper instead of the smooth countertop is absolutely disgusting. The dish drying rack always had food particles on it. He would rinse the dish, not well, and put it in the rack. No soap, no rubbing it, just whatever the water decided to carry down the drain. He was a good guy, just filthy, and since he came right from a home where mom did almost literally everything for him, it revealed itself in many ways. I mean, the last tenant left some freezer stuff, and he needed the space, so he put it on the top of the fridge in a bag. I never asked what the bag was until there was a smell of death in the kitchen on a really hot day. Yep, a bag of formerly frozen rotting veggies. Another time, he left a can of frozen OJ out, and I got sick of cleaning up after him all the time, so I left it. Middle of the night, when he was at work, I heard a weird noise like someone popped a bag, then metallic bouncing. The OJ had turned, and the pressure blew the lid off, and some of the contents was on the ceiling, fridge, and floor. One of the minor annoyances was that he never pitched in for anything, like toilet paper. It was a couple months into our setup, and I was gonna have to talk to him soon about that just out of principle. I know he didn't have much money though, so I was cutting him some slack. The little things kinda took a backbench to the odd and gross bathroom situation. Every time I went in there, I could tell instantly if he had been there. Well, the whole place was soaked. At first, I thought he was trying to clean and just left the water to dry, but it was a regular occurrence. The number of times I'd forget and sit on a soaked seat were so fucking irritating. Water all over the floor, all over the toilet seat and bowl rim, all over the sink all the fucking time. I called him the duck to my friends because he splashed water everywhere. Things started to unravel when we had an issue with the plumbing. The landlord, scum, wasn't fixing the clogged toilet. So in the middle of winter, I had to, regardless of time, get to the closest coffee shop to do my business. On the fourth day, I threatened to call a plumber. I had already poured a bunch of products down, bought and used a snake and a couple plungers. Longer story short, the landlord feverishly plunged for an hour and gave the all clear. I told him to wait and took 4 sheets of TP, dropped it into test flush, and he screamed, "No, don't flush the tissue. That's why it's blocked. You don't flush the tissue." I live in Canada, not Mexico, for reference. My roommate was staying out of the argument as we agreed. I wasn't afraid of the LL, but he was and couldn't risk getting kicked out. But it really hit me later when he admitted it wasn't so bad not being able to flush the tissue. A little embarrassed, he admitted, "I don't use the tissue. I use the water to clean." What the actual fuck? Now my mind is reeling and putting all the pieces together. He wasn't ever cleaning the bathroom, only his ass. That was ass splashing all over the place. This man never uses soap to wash his hands. He touches the handle to get out of the bathroom, his unwashed ass splashing paws all over the apartment. Gave notice and had to stay longer with this fear of death by E. coli.